So we have worked our way through Joshua and Judges, right? We have seen Judges, kind of the thematic theme of coming in as a unified people and obedient people and taking the whole land of Canaan. And in the book of Judges, it continues that thematic story where everything falls apart, right? We no longer have the strong leaders that we had in Moses or Joshua. We have these kind of tribal judges. And each time a judge dies, the people return to their sin. And remember, we were talking about that primary sin in the Deuteronomistic history as being idolatry and apostasy. Okay. Into this, or after Judges ends, we get the book of Samuel, right? And in most Bibles, it's called 1st and 2nd Samuel, and that's just because there are two scrolls of it. It was too large a text to fit onto one scroll. Okay, so the book of the book of Samuel is one book. It's just that the scrolls were too large to like put onto one big scroll. Okay, so that's why we have a 1st and 2nd Samuel, and it's the same for Kings. Okay, so with Samuel, what we're going to see is the transition from a confederation of tribes into a monarchy. This is what the book of Samuel is going to be laying out for us, is how this transition happens, how we go from confederacy to monarchy. And the first of the figures we get that kind of serves as a transitional figure is the figure of Samuel. And we know he's going to be a significant figure because of how the text starts. We have, again, a barren mother who prays for a child and is given Samuel. Okay? And just as we saw with the patriarchs, when you have a barren mother who bears a child, that child is significant. Right? That child has some kind of divinely designated role. And now the world that Samuel is going to be walking into, we can kind of break down into three main crises. Okay? And that's a religious crisis, a political crisis, and a military crisis. Okay? The religious crisis, the book opens actually, the first two chapters, we see Eli, who's a priest, kind of the head priest, and he has these corrupt sons, right? Taking bribes, corrupting justice. And these are supposed to be, priests for Israel, right? So just like we saw in Judges, right, this corruption is kind of continuing, right? The book of Samuel is very much opening where Judges has left off. Remember, Judges left off with that Nazarite, who's just going out to the highest bidder, and another Nazarite potentially who's, chopping up concubines. Right, so this is very much the world that Samuel is starting out with, is painting for us. And we even hear in 1 Samuel 3 that the words of Yahweh are rare. Right, now think about this and how much we've seen Yahweh communicating with his people in the past. Right, for the text to tell us that the words of Yahweh are rare is to tell us that there's some kind of break or rupture in this relationship. Now, the next one's the political crisis. And this is going to be a crisis that we'll see a lot more. But as we have all these kind of tribal leaders, there's this kind of crisis of succession. Who will reign next? Who's going to be in charge next? Who are we going to look up to? Who are we going to follow? Right? And it's definitely not going to be Eli and his sons, because the text has already gone and said, they're corrupt. Right? And finally, there's a military crisis. And this is where we see the Philistines really start to come on the scene. Okay, as being a threat to Israel, or at least that's how the text is portraying them. Now, let's see here. Yeah. Now, when we look at Samuel, we get a figure who portrays or fulfills three major roles in Israel, right? A prophet, priest, and a judge. Right? Now, prophets we'll talk about this much more when we kind of get to that section. But the main kind of roles of prophets right now, looking at this, are, let's skip to the second one, receiving the word of Yahweh, right? Right after it tells us that the words of the Lord are rare, just a little bit later in the text, we have Yahweh speaking to Samuel in the temple. Okay. And another thing Samuel will do that is the role of prophets is to anoint kings. Right? So it's Samuel who will anoint Saul as king. Now, interestingly enough, does anybody know what the word in Hebrew is for anointed? Now, chances are you all know the word, but I don't know if you know that it means anointed.
Was that in the book? 'Cause I don't remember it.
The Hebrew word for anointed is Messiah.
Oh, that's right, anointed one.
Right? The origin of the word Messiah is really just a king, an anointed king. The way that prophets would designate kings would communicate that they had divine favor bestowed on them, that God is backing up and confirming a king, right, as a ruler, is to anoint them with oil. Right? So a prophet would come, someone who is connected to Yahweh in this kind of way, and anoint the king with oil and say, yes, you can be king over Israel. Right? This is a very secular role, right? Or at least as initially. Okay. The next is that he's a priest, right? We see Samuel being offered by his mother into the priesthood, and he very much continues this kind of priestly role, right? Offering sacrifices, right? And finally, as judge, he leads the Israelite military campaigns against the Philistines, and he does seem to be a local leader in the same way that we've seen all the other judges being local leaders. Primarily, we see him in Benjamin, right? All that it says that he travels the circuit, and then he resides in, I think, Ramah. All of these towns are in the territory of Benjamin, right? So here we again have kind of seemingly a local military leader, right? But the text is going to kind of shift us now from having a local leader to having all the people come to Eli and ask him to help solve these problems, ask him for a king. Because unfortunately, Samuel doesn't quite cut it. Samuel's sons, in the same way that Eli's sons, also become corrupt. And he is not able to thwart the Philistines. And so the people come to Samuel and ask for a king. Right? All of these crises kind of remain after Samuel. Right? Who's going to remain after Samuel? Because his sons surely aren't going to do it. The people ask for a king. We'll get to this. And Samuel, despite the people, wanting a king, will tell them why this is a bad idea. To no avail. Now, kind of thinking, remember that all of this is in the Deuteronomic history, right? So it's going to be important to look with each of these figures how they're kind of still playing into the same kind of theology, these same kind of motifs that we've seen Joshua and Judges playing into. And Samuel does that too, right? One of the ways he does this is because he is so connected to the priesthood, right? Remember that our main sin is that idolatry and apostasy, and this is the main warning that Samuel is going to give the people, right? Kind of at the end of his time as a leader, before he appoints Saul, he's going to warn them against apostasy, against idolatry, against worshiping idols. Okay, so he kind of continues that same theme. And he also continues the theme because he not only says, don't worship these idols, but he says, if you will stay loyal to Yahweh, you will have success. Right? So even Samuel continues this theme of loyalty to Yahweh and obedience to Yahweh equals success. Right? Equals success in the land. Right? So, but like I said, despite Samuel's best efforts, right, things kind of come unraveled, and he's not able to really follow through on kind of holding back all of these crises that Israel is facing. The people come to him and say, appoint for us a leader, right? And their main motivation in asking for a leader is to defeat the Philistines, right? It is mainly, as far as the voicing of the people, this military threat that is leading to the need for a king, right? They ask for someone to come and fight for them, right? Samuel sends them all away after a little dialogue with Yahweh, and then we have the calling of Saul. And it's really Saul who takes us from this kind of loose confederacy to monarchy. He's the one who really moves us in that direction, right? Because he gets anointed, right? Because he gets anointed as a king. And he's initially a fairly well-liked character in one story. There's kind of two stories of Saul's kind of like rise to kingship, and one is where Samuel kind of goes to him, and Saul comes looking for some donkeys, and Samuel kind of has a interaction with him. There's another account of Saul's kind of being appointed, where Samuel gathers all the people together and is looking like kind of in the midst of this huge crowd for who will lead Israel. And he says, "Is this everybody?" And they have to go and drag Saul out of hiding, like behind some luggage or something like this. And Samuel's like, "Oh, it's this guy. I was looking for him."
Where is that?
It's in, I'm not sure I have it. I don't have it marked here. It's probably going to be in around 9. Yeah, 9 or 10 maybe. Yeah, chapter 9 or 10. Saul's hiding, right? It has to be kind of like brought out, and Samuel's like, "Oh, it's this guy," right? So you have these two kind of different stories of how Saul becomes king, right? And because he's hiding, some of the people, the text tells us that some of the people grumble, like, "Really, this guy?
Yeah.
The dude that was hiding?"
10:22.
10:22. There we go.
Oh,
What does it say?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a good chance. They inquired again of the Lord, "Is there a man still to come?" And behold, the Lord said, "Behold, he is hidden with himself behind the baggage."
There you go.
Mm.
Yeah. So, so for Saul, these military crises remain, but he starts to, it's with Saul that we start seeing these crises really addressed, right? This military crisis of the Philistines, the need for a strong leader to unify the people, right? And it's this unified army that was the major innovation of the monarchy, right? We need some kind of central leader to lead this battle so that we don't just have these tribes, right? So that we can kind of unify this tribal force that we have into being one unified military force, right? And so the army was mainly loyal to the king, not the people, right? It wasn't like here in the U.S. where this army is, I know we have the president as the commander-in-chief, but for ancient Israel, you have the army much more loyal to the king rather than being like the force of the people. And this may have actually been a much more gradual development in ancient Israel, right? The text is saying all the people rallied against or behind Saul and went out and fought the Philistines and the Amorites and the Amalekites and so on. But this may have been a much more gradual move, and the story is kind of condensing this gradual movement into kind of one king's reign, right? He enters into this religious crisis of the weak and dishonest priesthood, right, that Eli and Samuel have left behind. The world that he's stepping into, remember, we still do not have any kind of central shrine yet, right? Jerusalem is not a thing yet. We do not have a temple yet. So we still have mostly local shrines, just in the same way that we had in the time of Judges, right? This is the world that Saul has. There is no temple with Saul. But there is a move towards a state-supported religion, right? And this is going to be a huge shift, okay? Because Saul follows in Samuel's footsteps as a political leader and a prophet, right? So we have, with Samuel, you see him as a judge, but also as one who prophesies, and Saul follows suit, right? One of the first things that Samuel commands Saul to do is go find this like traveling band of prophets and see what happens, is pretty much what Samuel tells him. And Saul goes and begins prophesying. Okay. Another thing that he does, much to Samuel's chagrin, is that he offers up a sacrifice. right? Now, the reason he does this, the text tells us, is he goes to fight the Philistines, and they start getting pushed back. And so they kind of retreat. And Saul thinks, well, we need to have a sacrifice, right? We need to kind of like assuage Yahweh to kind of work for us and fight for us. And Samuel tells him it'll be there a little while. Saul waits and waits and waits, and Samuel never shows up. So Saul's like, it's fine. I'll just do it myself, right? So Saul kind of jumps the gun, offers the sacrifice. Samuel shows up, sees that this is happening, and gets really pissed, right? Because you have someone who is not a priest offering a sacrifice, right? This person who is a political leader overstepping his bounds into the religious realm. What's interesting is that when we get to David, David does this exact same thing. Nobody calls him out on it, right? But we start to see this shift towards a unified political and religious leader.
Why is that?
Huh?
Why is that? Why they call
Because
it?
David's the golden boy. What's that?
David was anointed. Is that what you said?
Saul was anointed too.
Saul was anointed. No, both were anointed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's also another thing he does in kind of overstepping his political bounds is you guys remember the ban, right? There's a call for Saul to, I think the text says, let me see here literally, devote to destruction the Amalekites, right? Saul goes in, fights this battle, but instead of killing everybody and everything, all the oxen, all the women, all the children, right? He only destroys kind of the junk. And then he takes all the fatted calves and all the great livestock and leaves King Agag alive, right? So violates this religious order, right? So kind of takes this, there's this religious command to destroy everything, and he violates that. And it's because of these things that we start to see Saul kind of losing God's favor in the text.
That was it for him.
Right. And then finally, here's this political, the focus leaves Saul as soon as David comes on the scene. Right? As soon as David hits the scene, Saul becomes completely second fiddle to David's narrative.
He almost turns, he's the bad guy after David comes on the scene.
Very much so. Do you have a question?
I was curious as to why, like these three crises, they persist through Samuel and Saul. Is David the golden boy because he finally puts those to bed or something?
In a sense, I think it's partly how the text narrates it, but there's also kind of this. There's a whole other thing that we'll see with David, a whole other covenant even with David. Yeah.
This might be getting a little bit off track here, but wasn't David really, really young and Saul really, really old?
Yeah. Yeah. As far as when David kind of comes along, you kind of get this. Saul ends up pathetic. Saul is pretty much crazy by the time that his life is over. Kind of looking at his failures here, his involvement in priestly matters, oversteps his royal bounds. He's unable to defeat the Philistines. The text actually says that divine favor leaves Saul and goes to David. Right? So by the end of Saul's reign, he's a pretty pathetic character.
That's sad. He didn't even want to be king, though. That's sad. You know what I mean? He didn't ask for this.
It's very true. Even in both narratives of Saul's becoming king, he doesn't go out and seek it. Yeah. Now, I think, okay, here's what I want to do with the last bit of time we have. Oh, we only have 7 minutes. How does this happen every day? Okay. Do I want to do this? Okay, here's what I want to do. Kind of for homework. I know you have the reading of the next chapter, but go ahead and write down these passages. 1 Samuel 8, 1 to 22. 1 Samuel 10, 17 to 27. 1 Samuel 12, 1 to 25. I guess all these are in 1 Samuel, so anyways. 9, 10, oops. 16, 11. Okay. These are all 1 Samuel.
1 through 10 and 16?
Well, 9, 1 through 10, 16.
What is it? 10?
So not chapter 9, verse 1 through chapter 10, verse 16.
Oh, chapters. These are
Yes.
chapters.
Yeah, so chapter 8, verses 1 to 22.
Oh.
Chapter 10, verse 17. So this is like, 20 verses. And
Oh.
you can kind of skim these if you want. But what I want you to do is think about, and I think, let me see here. No, that's fine. In the book of Samuel,
Wait a minute, I'm confused. Chapter 9.
chapter 9, verse 1, through chapter 10, verse 16.
So all the chapter
Oh,
9.
gotcha,
Yes.
gotcha,
Oh,
gotcha.
copy that. Got it.
Okay, so chapter
But all
8.
this is from-
Those other ones
Chapter
are
8,
verses.
1, yes.
Okay, yeah, I got a little confused.
What I want you to do is look at these passages, and I want you to think, do we have in Samuel a voice that is strongly supporting monarchy or strongly opposing monarchy? What is the perspective of Samuel about the monarchy? Should we have one, should we not? Based on these passages. Okay. Because I want us to start tomorrow by talking about the view of 1 Samuel about monarchy before we move into David, who is really the first king of Israel proper. Saul, there's been some people who've kind of said that Saul is more of a chieftain, someone who kind of rallies all the troops for like different tribes and kind of gets all the tribes together, and as this chieftain kind of leads them into battle and kind of serves as predominantly a military leader. And it's David where we really see the monarchy coming into its fullness.